Most organizations spend more time planning their next product launch than the next generation of leaders within their company. They hire fast, train reactively, and promote inconsistently. The result? Burnout, turnover, and talent walking out the door.
Yep.
At Empower, we believe developing leaders shouldn't be accidental. It should be highly intentional. And that's where the leadership pipeline comes in. It's a clear, repeatable framework that helps you build a self-sustaining leadership engine. And we'll come back and talk more about that, so that your people don't just perform, but they can thrive and multiply. I'm Eric Pfeiffer, and in this episode, I am joined by Don Neldon, and we're walking through the 4 stages of the leadership pipeline, which are recruit, train, deploy, and review, and how this process can transform not only your company, but your culture, your retention, and definitely the results that you're getting.
So true. And here's a distinction we want to make off the bat is that this process, those of you listening, your organization probably has a hiring process. We could talk about its effectiveness, but there's probably something in the HR manual about the hiring process. But what about a development process? Do you have an intentional plan for how you're going to train and develop and deploy those people once you have brought them into your organization? This is such a crucial piece of the success and ongoing success of an organization. And yet so many businesses struggle to do it well. We see it time and time again with clients. This is a huge area of struggle. So I'm curious, Eric, where do most leaders and organizations get this wrong? What's falling apart for them?
Yeah, it's a great question. Let me point out 2 common deficiencies that we run across, and there's many others, but hopefully our listeners will connect with these 2. One is we often hire for competence or skill, and in the process neglect character. And let's be honest, the conversation around character is not a popular conversation in most of the places we go, because nobody wants to feel judged, condemned. We all kind of have this mentality of I'm a good person and I don't want to be looked at in a different way.
I'm here to do a
And
job.
yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll keep my personal life out there and I show up. As long as I do my job, then I get my paycheck and everybody's good. The problem is, as human beings, because we're integrated creatures, who we are is who we are wherever we go. And so we're going to bring the quality of our character, which is something that we're always evolving, developing, trying to mature into the workplace. In other words, I would talk about competence being what we do at work, and character being about how we show up at work.
Yeah,
And
good.
here's what we discover is how people show up oftentimes undermines what we're trying to do when we show up. And so we talk about how it's our lack of character or development of character that undermines our competence. And we see this over and over and over again. Somebody who's highly skilled, somebody who's got a lot of experience in a particular job, and we celebrate them until they become difficult to work with, toxic, overbearing, manipulative, backbiting, gossiping. And then we're like, what happened? This person is so amazing. And then as leaders, we feel stuck. What do I do with this person? Because they're actually producing some great things within our organization, but at the same time, they're undermining the relational fabric of our team or our organization. They are becoming incredibly difficult to work with, and we don't know what to do with that tension. And the good news is this is actually true for all people. We are all always on a journey of developing our competencies, and I think we're okay with that idea. But I think we need to accept that we also need to pay as much attention to how we're developing character. The second major deficiency that we run across is when we think of these 4 stages of the leadership pipeline, which we're going to unpack in a moment: recruit, train, deploy, review. We often see companies that recruit or hire, whether it's from outside or internally, promoting people, and then we deploy them. We kind of throw them
Yep.
into their job responsibility, and we just kind of expect that they're going to figigure it out.
Yep.
Uh,
RPN.
And the problem is we don't give a lot of attention to the ongoing training and development of those people. And we rarely review with them. So we're rarely giving them the kind of qualitative feedback that would even give them a chance to know where they need to grow and develop, right? We do the one once a year official HR review. That's, really not doing much good, because as human beings, what we'll talk about in a minute is we grow more effectively when we get regular feedback.
That's right. That's right. Okay, so break it down for us. Walk us through this process of the leadership pipeline, just like you would with your clients.
Yeah. I'll do it a little more quickly than we would do normally in one of our coaching experiences. But these 4 stages: recruit, train, deploy, review. And when and we'll come back to this at the end, but when we do this well, what we begin to create within any environment is what we call a leadership engine, right? Which is a group of people who are operating in such a way that, just like an engine has all these multiple parts, and when all those parts are functioning well together, it produces power, efficiency, right? It enables us to travel, to cover distance, to accomplish things. When that engine is leaky, when parts are old, when gaskets have blown, when we don't have enough liquid or oil in that engine, we start to experience the sputtering effect. And I think this is oftentimes when leaders contact us, when they feel the sputtering experience, they're not sure how to address it. And, it's a funny metaphor, but oftentimes we're brought in as the kind of leadership mechanic to, pop the hood and say, hey, let me help you diagnose what's going on. And let's be honest, we all know that when you find a good, trustworthy mechanic, they're worth their weight in gold.
Yes.
Which is why I think our coaching business has been so successful, is because we've just gotten really good at popping the hood and diagnosing what's going on, and giving people a really fair opportunity to make the necessary changes. Okay, so let's unpack these 4 areas. Recruit. We're talking about when we're recruiting people from outside the company, we're hiring people in, or even when we're promoting people within the company, we have to have an intentional recruiting strategy. We often talk about what we call the 4 filters of recruiting, that encourage our listeners to think, which ones of these am I doing well? Which are we not doing well?
Mhm.
Where are we
So this
seeing
is
deficiency?
the top of the pipeline, right? This is where we're
Top of the pipeline. Yep. Top of the pipeline. So these 4 filters, when we're recruiting, we've got to think about, first and foremost, we've got to think about the quality of somebody's character. In other words, how do people show up? And not just how do people show up, but how do people show up when things aren't going well, when they're under pressure, when things aren't going their way, when there's conflict, when there's disagreement, right? Everybody's their best version of themselves when things are going well or their way, but we don't really find out who people are until we put them under enough pressure. So I do think, practical things like checking references, calling, here's a great question, asking the person who's interviewing, hey, when I contact your former boss, what are they going to tell me about the way that you handle yourself when things aren't going your way?
Mm.
Right. It's a great question to begin to try to get a beat on what happens to this person when they crack, right? Because we're humans. We're all going to get triggered, get derailed. We all crack. But what does that look like? What is this person's ability to recover from those difficult situations? Another filter. We start with character, then we talk about capacity. What is this person's capacity? And we talk about mental capacity. We talk about emotional capacity. We talk about capacity could just be what we think of as bandwidth. Is this person going to have to drive 2.5 hours to get to the office every single day? If this person's working remotely, like, do they have the capacity to stay in alignment with the rest of the team? Can they carry the load? Do they have the mental fortitude? Do they have, when we think of capacity, think of bandwidth. Does this person have bandwidth? So for example, if somebody's in the process of taking care of elderly parents, that's not a knock against that interviewee. It's just a reality that we need to pay attention to, because their bandwidth is going to be limited. Do they have, 5 young children under the age of 8? These are realities. And again, it doesn't mean we don't hire these people. It just means we want to pay attention to people's bandwidth, or what we call capacity. The third filter is chemistry. What is this person's ability to engage, to get along with, to partner with others, to play with others well? And
Mhm.
again, sometimes, we have to consider, personality or wiring, natural wirings, right? So if you need somebody who's going to interact regularly with a larger team and they're, highly introverted, that may be something to question. Hey, is this going to be okay for you? The workspace itself, are they in an open space where everybody can see and hear each other? And, how is that person going to respond in that environment? And again, going back to the issue of character, can this
Mhm.
person play well with others when they're up against it, when there's a lot of pressure on? So that's what we would call chemistry. And I just want to make sure our listeners understand. I'm not talking about the kind of chemistry of like, oh, we like the same sports team, right?
Right.
Or we enjoy the same restaurant. That's fine. We don't have to be best friends with everybody we work with, but there has to be a minimum ability for people to get along with other people, regardless of, especially when you have a diverse team, for people from different backgrounds, people with different views. That over time, if people can't get along with people that are different to them, then that starts to create a lot of what I would call kind of an undercurrent of tension and dissension and frustration, and usually leads to some unfortunate experiences. The last filter is competence, right? And we put that last because I think it's the one we pay the most attention to.
Sure.
It's the one we're most well experienced in. How do we test for somebody's ability to do the job related responsibilities that we're bringing them in for? So I won't speak to it much, but yes, we do keep competence because that does matter, because you can hire the nicest people in the world that get along with everybody, who have a lot of bandwidth, but if they can't do the actual job being asked of them, then we've got a major problem on our hands. So those are the four filters. Anything you would want to touch on or highlight
I
on before we move on?
well, I have a couple questions for you, but first I wanna point out too, one thing that we talk about over and over with our clients is that, yes, competency, the actual ability to do the skill matters, but you can train for specific competencies.
Mhm.
You can't really train for the other pieces of the other 3 of those filters, the character, the chemistry, the capacity. Those are you can't do much training around that. So it's something that's really important to keep in mind. One thing that I know clients ask us a lot when we're going over this recruiting phase with them is, okay, how can we understand in an interview process the chemistry piece and the capacity piece? What are some questions? Because you spoke to the character piece, you gave us some practical questions to ask there. What are some questions or things that we could do to help us understand capacity and chemistry in an interview process?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions we can ask the person being interviewed, but oftentimes what we're going to get is what they think we want to hear. So one of the things that I often, encourage people who are doing the interview process is to say, hey, create an environment in which these things can come to the surface. So instead of having somebody, come into an office and it's a sterile environment where we're sitting across the table from each other and I'm asking you a barrage of questions, why don't we grab a few of the people they're going to work with and let's go have lunch together? Hey, let's go have dinner together. Hey, why don't you can you come in and spend a day in the office? And I just want to introduce you to a variety of people and I want you to be able to ask them questions, because I think too often we're not leveraging the rest of our team to give us the feedback of their experience with the interviewee. And oftentimes it takes a while for someone to kind of let their guard down before you're going to get some real honest, responses and answers. But I find that over meals, in more casual situations, you're going to tend to get a little bit more honesty from folks. So I think creating an environment in which people can feel a little bit less formal, a little bit more comfortable, is going to be really helpful in beginning to assess and identify who this person really is. And then, of course, for those listeners who are familiar with some of our tools, once people learn our toolkit, that becomes a kind of framework through which we're listening to people and giving us a better ability to discern, to detect, what somebody's bringing to the table.
Mhm.
So, and again, we'll come back to that. Let's jump on to the second main process or part of the leadership pipeline, which is to train. And I tell people there's really two categories I want people to think in from, basically is we need to provide the obvious ongoing job related skills training that people need, right? There's new software programs, there's new, management skills that people need to learn. There's new, how to run a meeting, how to write reports. There's all that stuff.
Mhm.
I would also say, going back to the competence versus character, we've got to have an intentional way of training people how to show up to work well.
Yeah.
We assume because somebody's an adult or they've had multiple years of experience in other companies that they know how to show up well. So here's a question I would ask our listeners. Do we even know what we expect of people when it comes to how they can show up well? How they
Such a
resolve conflicts, how they handle difficult conversations, how they handle themselves when stuff is going difficult at home, right? Because we all have this whole other part of our life that, whether we like it or not, we are bringing into the workplace every single day.
Mhm.
No one's going to convince me that you can just leave, half of yourself at the door when you walk in. Like, we're bringing our attitudes, our moods, our other life experiences. When parents are ailing, when marriage isn't going well, when our kids are misbehaving, when the economy is crashing, we carry all of that into the workplace. And we have to, as leaders, set what we call, and we'll come back to this, a radical minimum standard, not just for job related skills, but for how we expect people to show up and operate
Yeah.
in the midst of how they engage with other people and how they do their job related skills. So those are the two categories of training that I think are critical. And we'll come back to this. This is probably where I have seen the least amount of intentionality in the companies. They usually have an onboarding training process that may or may not be helpful. But when it comes to ongoing training opportunities, both for what we do and how we do what we do, I think those are critical.
Yeah. And we often say that the culture piece is the how we do it. And so it's even helpful to think of somebody that's coming into your company almost like they're experiencing a cross-cultural experience. They're having a cross-cultural experience.
Yes.
So you can't expect to understand how this new culture operates unless they've done some work, some research, gotten some training around how does this culture email? How does this culture process data? How does this culture respond when they feel misunderstood? And I think many times, just like it is with our own culture, it's hard to identify those pieces and articulate them clearly. When we are in that culture, inviting somebody in, we often don't even think about, like you were saying, what are the expectations? How
Yeah.
how do we expect them to show up?
Yeah.
And how to communicate that to them in a helpful way.
One, here's a helpful parallel. Like, anybody who's gotten married before or has a really significant, long-term significant relationship, like, just engaging with the other person's family
Yeah.
is a cross-cultural experience. And how do we overcome that? And what's safe here? What's not safe here? And how can we talk? And how do we not talk? And how do we joke? And how do we not joke? It, for most people, we don't really know how to integrate in those spaces. And so what we do is we either just kind of, subsume ourselves into that new culture, and we just kind of, say, "Oh, I guess I'm going to forget who I am and I'll just be a part of this new environment," or we reject the new culture and we create that kind of dissonance because we want to preserve our own personal culture. So I love that. It's a great highlight. Third process of the leadership pipeline: deployment. When it comes to deployment, again, intentionality. How are we effectively deploying our team members? And I want people to think of two areas. One, we want to deploy people into a responsibility where we believe they can win. Doesn't
Mhm.
mean they're not going to have struggles, battles, hardships, but where we believe they can win. We want to set people up for success, but we also want to deploy people into areas where they're going to feel genuinely challenged. Because I think very, very often we hire somebody, we deploy them into a responsibility, and then, 8 years later, they're doing the same thing. And we never
Yes.
slow down to ask the question, is this person bored, or, have they, because as human beings, when we just do the same thing every day and everything becomes super familiar, we actually stop growing. And I think one of the complaints of the younger generation of the workforce is you're hiring me for a job, but then I feel like I get stuck in that position.
Yeah.
I don't feel like you care about my development, you care about my progress. I don't think you see my potential, and that's a huge tension in workplace culture nowadays. And I think for those of us who are in at the age of where we're in charge, where we do have a lot of influence in a team or a company, to be thoughtful, like, okay, I don't want my people to feel stuck. I want them to feel like there's upward mobility, there's opportunities to try new things, because again, once people have done the same thing over and over again, they will get bored. And,
Yeah.
the assembly line can work, but only for a short season. Eventually, people get burned out, bored, and then those are the people that start to cause trouble, quite frankly. So
Yeah.
let's jump into the last one, review the fourth part of the leadership pipeline. And again, the visuals of this tool are available in the show notes. So please check it out. It's very simple, but it's fun to see these visuals because it makes everything just really clear and memorable. But the review process, this is by far the most neglected aspect of a leadership pipeline in any organization and any team. We talked about this earlier. We tend to still lean into these annual reviews that are very ineffective. And I want to encourage people to think in this respect. We've already said it. Human beings are hardwired to grow when we get regular, helpful feedback. And therefore, when we're thinking about a review process, number one, we want it to have enough frequency that people have regular opportunities to recognize where they're doing well and where they might have opportunity to grow or to change or to
Yeah.
develop. That's really important. Number two, the review process of checking in with people gives us as leaders a clearer view of how that person is doing and where they actually need to grow and where they might need some more intentional training.
Mhm.
That's equally important for us as leaders to consider this. That's for our best interest. Um, and then here are the two questions. Say if you don't know where to start with a review process, here are the two simple questions. Hey, you're going to sit down maybe for 15, 20, 30 minutes with somebody in your team, and weekly, bi-weekly, I would say anything after bi-weekly, maybe not, it's not enough frequency. Ask these questions. Number one, tell me, what do you think is going well? And what do you think is not going well? And the second question, where do you believe you're performing well? And where do you think you could perform more effectively? Those
Mhm.
two questions, and I say to the leader, ask them to reflect on those two questions, because again, it gives us insight into how they view themselves, how they view their part in the team, their contribution to the organization, and it gives us as leaders an opportunity to now give feedback based on their perception of what's going on. So it again allows the leader to constantly feel in tune with how their team is doing, how their people are doing, and how we as leaders can more intentionally invest. Now, here's what happens. Once we recruit somebody into our team, our organization, if we will intentionalize the training, deployment, and review process, and you can see how this starts to create like a circle: train, deploy, review, train, deploy, review, train, deploy, review, train, deploy, review. And
Yep.
if we have a mechanism, and this takes far less time than people think, to do this on a regular basis, guess what happens? This is the way that we begin to reshape the culture of our organization. We've talked about this before. Culture is, this is how we do it. This is how we do it. Whether it's job related skills or how we show up to work and engage with other people, we reshape the culture or shape it into the desired culture that will lead to greater efficiency, productivity, profitability, greater enjoyment for everybody involved when we commit ourselves to intentionalizing this process. And so I tell people, don't wait until your car is broken down on the side of the road.
Yeah.
Pay attention to the lights on the dashboard. If you're sputtering, if you're seeing any of the signs, people are not working well together. You've got toxic personalities, you've got dissension, you've got people who are kind of siloing and fracturing the team. If you've got whatever that doesn't feel right, don't wait until you're broken down on the side of the road. Find a great coach, a great team. We're happy to be helpful. There's other great coaches out there who can help you diagnose what's going on and give you a chance to make the necessary repairs and then the maintenance on the engine, the leadership engine of your company, so that you feel confident that you can be as productive as possible.
Yeah. One thing I love about that process too is it actually gives leaders the freedom and a strategy for how to stop micromanaging, because they don't have to be constantly looking over the shoulder to make sure that things are going well. It's relying on that process of the review and then the tweaking and the training, that it can feel like a much more organic way to help your people grow than feeling like you're just looking over their shoulder the whole time.
Yeah, I love that. It's very similar to, somebody decides they want to get fit, lose weight, get healthier. They go to the gym. I'm gonna go to the gym. And so then they go to the gym, twice that week, and then the next week once, and then they don't go to the gym after that. We all know we don't transform our fitness, our health, our capacity, our strength by one big,
Yeah.
you know, training event every 6 months or every year.
Right.
It's what I heard somebody on a podcast one time say. It's about stacking days.
Mm.
And I think the leadership pipeline when it comes to training, deployment, reviewing, if we would just learn to stack those days, it doesn't have to be a 2-hour meeting. It could be a 15 to 20-minute session where it's like, hey, how are you doing? What's going on? Ask those 2 questions we talked about. How do we make sure that we're investing in you, in terms of your job related skills and how you're showing up? And then let's get you back out there. And if we do this regularly in these little short bursts, what happens is over time we see significant transformation.
Yeah, that's good. And I've also heard you say, I think this is really important, that the tighter the timeline between the event and the review, the better for our learning process. And I want to say personally, I've experienced that, because even for our team, after we have a significant event, even after we podcast, for example, we take a few moments just to review how it went. And when you offer feedback, I'm able to see that in pretty much real time and then implement so that we can make changes and tweaks moving forward.
Yeah, and let me just point our listeners to one of our books that we put out there. It's called Transform Your Trajectory, and in this book, we introduce our kind of what we consider our key processing learning tool. It's the tool that we recommend to our leaders that they use in any review process, reviewing a project, reviewing an event, reviewing, how's our finances, reviewing whatever, wherever you're gonna review anything. And in this book is a whole section on how do we review really well, breaks down how to use this tool and how to do this so that we can maximize, optimize our ability to excavate the learning, so that we can recalibrate over and over and over again to continuously get better results.
And the other thing I think this provides for your team members is that feedback doesn't feel as scary,
That's right.
because you're not feeling like, oh my gosh, this person has been, saving up all of the bad things that I've done over the last year, and I'm going to come and they're just going to dump them all on me. No, hey, this went well. This could have been better. Great. Let's move forward and make that small adjustment. It feels so much more manageable and less punitive, I
Yeah, I
would say.
love that. I love that. That's fantastic. That's a great, great, great highlight. Thank you, Dawn. Ooh, all right, should we jump into a practical
Yeah.
and practical examples? Yeah, I love this. Now, on this situation, again, I'm always very protective of our clients. I never want to call out a client and then them kind of hear the podcast and feel like, gosh, when you're throwing us under the bus. But thankfully, I'm going to give just a wonderful example. Not going to call out the client by name, but an organization that we've had the privilege of working with for some time now, who, as they stepped into a significant leadership role in the organization, realized that the culture of the organization was really dysfunctional. And what I mean by that is there was a lot of competent people in the organization, but how they were showing up and interacting with each other was very toxic. It's a classic example of a lot of, siloing and people not talking and people hoarding information and a lot of gossip and back channeling. And this leader just asked me, Eric, like, what are we going to do here? And so, they had been through our coaching process. And, hey, you're going to have to implement a leadership pipeline. You're going to have to implement a way of intentionalizing not just the recruiting process. You've inherited this group of people,
Right.
but if you intentionalize the training in both competence and character, if you intentionalize the deployment and the review process, guess what's going to happen? There are going to be some people that are going to want to be a part of the new culture that you envision. Because through training and reviewing, you're holding people accountable to, hey, this is how we do things here. This is how we
Right.
do things here. Let's constantly adjust. Let's realign ourselves. And other people will over time self-select out. And I remember him saying, you mean I may not even have to fire everyone? I'm like, no, you may have to let a couple people go, but a lot of these people are just like, I don't want to be a part of this environment. We're gonna have to have hard conversations in healthy ways. Ah, that doesn't sound good. We're gonna have to resolve the drama between me and somebody in another department. I'm gonna have to actually learn how to communicate well through email or text. I'm actually gonna have to start setting some healthy boundaries. I can't just continue being a people pleaser. Oh, that sounds terrible. So I'm gonna opt out. And
Yeah.
what's really interesting, it took about, I'd say 12 to 18 months, if I'm being honest, right? We all want this to happen overnight, but about 12 to 18 months from the time when he entered this role to the end of that 12 or 18 months. I can't remember exactly what it was, somewhere in there. What had happened was a percentage of the people said, this isn't for me, and left. A very small percentage of people had to be turned over. But what transpired over that time was that this leader continuously reiterated over and over, this is how we do things. This is how we do things. This is how we do things. You've been measured by your competence, but now we are all being measured by what we do and how we do what we do. They both equally matter.
Mhm.
And what transpired was a team of people who not only loved working together. So we're experiencing, and we did a bunch of interviews with these folks, who not only enjoyed what they were doing, felt a greater sense of personal satisfaction, fulfillment, a sense of purpose, connected to the mission of the organization. These people all shared stories of significant growth that they had experienced since they were in the company. And even one person made this comment, and I'll never forget it. They said, Eric, I don't know how long I'll be in this organization, but I can tell you, I will be a greater asset if and when I leave this organization than when I came in here.
That's so good.
That is like flipping the script on most people feel like they're just being used by the company. They're a cog in the machine, right? Like they're giving their life away with maybe a paycheck in return, but the company doesn't really care about them. And it's not like this leader put on a billion leadership training things and a lot of crazies. He just committed himself to intentionalizing the leadership pipeline. And what came out on the other end was a legitimate leadership engine that was operating effectively and efficiently, that had a lot of power and output. But most importantly, the people within that community felt seen, heard, valued, invested in. They felt like literally they were going to be a better version of themselves on the back end. And that, to me, as a leader, is the greatest praise you can receive from your team members.
That's significant. That's significant. Okay, so help us move then from like that's the vision, being a place where the people who leave us are better than they were when they came to us. That is every leader's dream, frankly. How do we move from where we are, maybe feeling like we're stuck, we don't have a great system, we aren't being intentional about this, towards that vision? How do we take one or two steps toward that vision? Give us some practical rubber meets the road stuff.
That's a great question. In the same way that we don't fix an engine in a second or a minute, it takes some time. Sometimes we got to leave our car at the shop for a day or two or three, right? But because we believe what's going to come out on the other side is going to be better. Um, Here's a few things. First of all, let me just run through some helpful questions so that our listeners can reflect on each of these 4 areas of the pipeline, right? So, one question: when it comes to recruiting, who are you currently recruiting? And are you using these 4 filters? So go back to those filters of character and capacity and chemistry and competence. Really important to go back and say, are we actually considering these different areas, or are we kind of stuck just looking for competent individuals? When it comes to training, what part of your training is missing? Are you providing ongoing skills training? Are you providing ongoing, what we would call character or culture training? This is how we do it. This is how we show up. Do we have a clear vision for how we expect people to show up? Because most people have a clear vision for what we want them to do, but we don't have a clear vision for how we expect them, pardon me, to show up. So that's a great question. The third, when it comes to deployment, are our people in the right seats of the bus. Jim Collins and Good to Great talks about get the right people on the bus and then find the right seats. Well, we need to continuously be wrestling with this for our team. Are they winning? Are they growing? Are we challenging them? And if not, then we need to really reflect on that and ask what needs to be done. And then the last, when it comes to review, when was the last time you gave real-time growth-oriented feedback? And do we have a regular rhythmic mechanism for soliciting from our team? How are you experiencing the workplace and what you're doing? And then opportunities for us as leaders to speak into that. So those are 4 helpful reflective questions. But I would even push it so far as to say, listen, you're not going to fix your engine overnight. It's a long-term process. So here's my encouragement. When you think of the 4 areas of the leadership pipeline, recruit, train, deploy, review, maybe rate yourself or rate your team, or maybe you're not the leader of the organization or the team, but just, reflect on whatever environment you're in. As a matter of fact, this might sound surprising to many people, but this is a great parenting strategy. Right? Like, how are we training, deploying, and reviewing with our kids to help them continually grow and develop? Let me say it this way. Rate yourself 1 to 10 in each of these 4 areas. And when you think of the highest number, celebrate that. Celebrate that. Yeah, you take your car to the shop because it's not working well, but there's parts of your car that are working well. Let's make sure we celebrate that, right? Not everything's broken. And let's lean on that as we then look at the lowest numbers and say, okay, what would it look like for me to intentionally engage in increasing our training process or our deployment or review process, or going back to our recruiting process? And I think that's a great starting point because, like I say to people all the time, let's start with one challenge at a time, and then let's just start working through each one.
That's so helpful. To our listeners, I want to tell you right now to click that subscribe button, because next week we are going to be talking about the glue of every organization that holds our teams together, which is our tool, the Trust Code. So you do not want to miss next episode. It's one of my favorites, frankly. And for all of you listeners, if something in this episode really hit home, I challenge you to send this episode to another leader that you think could benefit from some of the learnings that took place throughout this episode. And lastly, we have a free gift for you, like always, in our show notes. Download our free mini course, 5 Shifts to Becoming the Leader You Wish You Had. The link is in the show notes, along with the tool. There we go. Along with the tool diagrams for you to take a look at. And here's our encouragement to you. Let's stop winging development and start being intentional about the leaders that we are building on our team.
Love that.
See you next time.